He was drunk. It was late at night, at a bar on Hollywood Boulevard. Fortunately, Mary Lou was with him, and he was having a good time. Everyone was telling him so anyway. He clung to Mary Lou and said, "The great unity in life, the supreme unity in meaning, is man and woman. Their absolute unity, right?" "I know," Mary Lou said. "We studied that in class." Tonight, at his request, Mary Lou was a small blonde girl, wearing purple bell-bottoms and high heels and an open midriff blouse. Earlier she had had a lapis lazuli in her navel, but during dinner at Ting Ho's it had popped out and been lost. The owner of the restaurant had promised to keep on searching for it, but Mary Lou had been gloomy ever since. It was, she said, symbolic, but of what she did not say. Or anyhow, he could not remember. Maybe that was it. She had told him what it meant, and he had forgotten. An elegant young black at a nearby table, with an afro and striped vest and overstuffed red tie, had been staring at Addison for some time. He obviously wanted to come over to their table, but was afraid to. Meanwhile, he kept on staring. "Did you ever get the sensation," Addison said to Mary Lou, "that you knew exactly what was about to happen, what someone was going to say, word for word, down to the slightest detail, as if you had already lived through it once before?" "Everybody gets into that space," Mary Lou said. She sipped a Bloody Mary. The black rose and walked toward them. He stood by Addison. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," Addison said to Mary Lou. "He's going to say, 'Don't I know you from somewhere? Didn't I see you on TV?'" "That's precisely what I intended to say," the black said. Addison said, "You undoubtedly saw my picture on page 46 of the current issue of Time, the section on new medical discoveries. I'm the GP from a small town in Iowa catapulted to fame by my invention of a widespread, easily available cure for eternal life. Several of the big pharmaceutical houses are already bidding on my vaccine." "That might have been where I saw your picture," the black said, but he did not appear convinced, nor did he appear drunk. He eyed Addison Doug intensely. "May I seat myself with you and the lady?" "Sure," Addison Doug said. He now saw, in the man's hand, the ID of the U.S. security agency that had ridden herd on the project from the start. "Mr. Doug," the security agent said as he seated himself beside Addison, "you really shouldn't be here shooting off your mouth like this. If I recognized you, some other dude might, and freak out. It's all classified until the day of mourning. Technically, you're in violation of a federal statute by being here. Did you realize that? I should haul you in. But this is a difficult situation. We don't want to do something uncool and make a scene. Where are your two colleagues?" "At my place," Mary Lou said. She had obviously not seen the ID. "Listen," she said sharply to the agent. "Why don't you get lost? My husband here has been through a grueling ordeal, and this is his only chance to unwind." Addison looked at the man. "I knew what you were going to say before you came over here. Word for word," he thought. "I am right, and Benz is wrong, and this will keep happening. This replay. Maybe," the security agent said, "I can induce you to go back to Miss Hawkins' place voluntarily. Some info arrived." He tapped the tiny earphone in his right ear. "Just a few minutes ago, to all of us, to deliver to you, marked urgent, if we located you. At the launch site ruins. They've been combing through the rubble, you know." "I know," Addison said. "They think they have their first clue. Something was brought back by one of you, from ETA, over and above what you took, in violation of all your pre-launch training. Let me ask you this," Addison Doug said. "Suppose somebody does see me. Suppose somebody does recognize me. So what? The public believes that even though re-entry failed, the flight into time, the first American time travel launch, was successful. 3 U.S. Tempunauts were thrust 100 years into the future, roughly twice as far as the Soviet launch of last year. that you only when a week will be less of a shock if it's believed that you three chose deliberately to remanifest at this continuum because you wished to attend, in fact felt compelled to attend. We wanted to be in the parade, Addison interrupted. Twice. You were drawn down to the dramatic and somber spectacle of your own funeral procession, and will be glimpsed there by the alert camera crews of all major networks. Mr. Doug, really, an awful lot of high-level planning and expense have gone into this to help correct a dreadful situation. Trust us, believe me. It'll be easier on the public, and that's vital, if there's ever to be another U.S. time shot. And that is, after all, what we all want. Addison Doug stared at him. We want what? Uneasily, the security agent said, to take further trips into time, as you have done. Unfortunately, you yourself cannot ever do so again, because of the tragic implosion and death of the three of you. But other Tempunauts, we want what? Is that what we want? Addison's voice rose. People at nearby tables were watching now, nervously. Certainly, the agent said, and keep your voice down. I don't want that, Addison said. I want to stop forever, to just lie on the ground, in the dust, with everyone else, to see no more summers, the same summer. Seen one, you've seen them all, Mary Lou said hysterically. I think he's right, Addie. We should get out of here. You've had too many drinks, and it's late, and this news about the Addison broke in. What was brought back? How much extra mass? The security agent said, Preliminary analysis shows that machinery weighing about 100 pounds was lugged back into the time field of the module and picked up along with you. This much mass, the agent gestured, that blew up the pad right on the spot. It couldn't begin to compensate for that much more than had occupied its open area at launch time. Wow, Mary Lou said, eyes wide. Maybe somebody sold one of you a quadraphonic phono for $1.98. Including 15-inch air suspension speakers and a lifetime supply of Neil Diamond records. She tried to laugh, but failed. Her eyes dimmed over. Addie, she whispered, I'm sorry, but it's sort of weird. I mean, it's absurd. You all were briefed, weren't you, about your return to weight? You weren't even to add so much as a piece of paper to what you took. I even saw Dr. Fiend demonstrating the reasons on TV. And one of you hoisted 100 pounds of machinery into the field? You must have been trying to self-destruct to do that. Tears slid from her eyes. One tear rolled out onto her nose and hung there. He reached reflexively to wipe it away, as if helping a little girl rather than a grown one. I'll fly you to the analysis site, the security agent said, standing up. He and Addison helped Mary Lou to her feet. She trembled as she stood a moment, finishing her Bloody Mary. Addison felt acute sorrow for her, but then, almost at once, it passed. He wondered why. One can weary even of that, he conjectured, of caring for someone, if it goes on too long, on, forever, and, at last, even after that, into something no one before, not God himself, maybe, had ever had to suffer, and in the end, for all his great heart, succumb to. As they walked through the crowded bar toward the street, Addison Doug said to the security agent, Which one of us? They know which one, the agent said, as he held the door to the street open for Mary Lou. The agent stood now behind Addison, signaling for a gray federal car to land at the red parking area. Two other security agents in uniform hurried toward them. Was it me? Addison Doug asked. You better believe it, the security agent said. The funeral procession moved with aching solemnity down Pennsylvania Avenue. 3 flag-draped caskets and dozens of black limousines passing between rows of heavily coated, shivering mourners. A low haze hung over the day. Gray outlines of buildings faded into the rain-drenched murk of the Washington March Day. Scrutinizing the lead Cadillac through prismatic binoculars, TV's top news and public events commentator Henry Cassidy droned on at his vast, unseen audience. Sad recollections of that earlier train among the wheat fields carrying the coffin of Abraham Lincoln back to burial and the nation's capital. And what a sad day this is, and what appropriate weather, with its dour overcast and sprinkles. In his monitor he saw the Zumar lens pan up on the fourth Cadillac, as it followed those with the caskets of the dead Tempunauts. His engineer tapped him on the arm. "We appear to be focusing on 3 unfamiliar figures so far not identified, riding together," Henry Cassidy said into his neck mic, nodding agreement. "So far I'm unable to quite make them out." "Are your location and vision any better from where you're placed, Everett?" he inquired of his colleague, and pressed the button that notified Everett Branton to replace him on the air. "Why, Henry," Branton said in a voice of growing excitement, "I believe we're actually eyewitness to the 3 American Tempunauts as they remanifest themselves on their historic journey into the future." "Does this signify," Cassidy said, "that somehow they have managed to solve and overcome the—" "Afraid not, Henry," Branton said in a slow, regretful voice. "What we're eyewitnessing, to our complete surprise, consists of the Western world's first verified glimpse of what the technical people refer to as emergence time activity." "Ah, yes, ETA," Cassidy said brightly, reading it off the official script the federal authorities had handed him before airtime. "Right, Henry. Contrary to what might seem to be the case at first sight, these are not, repeat, not, our 3 brave Tempunauts as such, as we would ordinarily experience them." "I grasp it now, Everett," Cassidy broke in excitedly. Since his authorized script read, Cass breaks in excitedly. "Our 3 Tempunauts have momentarily suspended in their historic voyage to the future, which we believe will span across to a time continuum roughly a century from now. It would seem that the overwhelming grief and drama of this unanticipated day of mourning has caused them to—" "Sorry to interrupt, Henry," Everett Branton said, "but I think since the procession has momentarily halted on its slow march forward, that we might be able to—" "No," Cassidy said, as the note was handed him in a swift scribble, reading, "Do not interview Knots. Urgent." "I don't think we're going to be able to," he continued, "to speak briefly with Tempunauts Benz, Crane, and Doug, as you had hoped, Everett, as we had all briefly hoped to." He wildly waved the boom mic back. It had already begun to swing out expectantly toward the stopped Cadillac. Cassidy shook his head violently at the mic technician and his engineer. Perceiving the boom mic swinging at them, Addison Doug stood up in the back of the open Cadillac. Cassidy groaned. He wants to speak, he realized. Didn't they re-instruct him? Why am I the only one they get across to? Other boom mics representing other networks plus radio station interviewers on foot now were rushing out to thrust up their microphones into the faces of the 3 Tempunauts, especially Addison Doug's. Doug was already beginning to speak, in response to a question shouted up to him by a reporter. With his boom mic off, Cassidy couldn't hear the question, nor Doug's answer. With reluctance, he signaled for his own boom mic to trigger on. "Before," Doug was saying loudly. "In what manner all this has happened before," the radio reporter, standing close to the car, was saying. "I mean," U.S. Tempunaut Addison Doug declared, his face red and strained, "that I have stood here in this spot and said again and again, and all of you have viewed this parade and our deaths at re-entry endless times, a closed cycle of trapped time which must be broken. Are you seeking," another reporter jabbered up at Addison Doug, "for a solution to the re-entry implosion disaster which can be applied in retrospect so that when you do return to the past, you will be able to correct the malfunction and avoid the tragedy which cost, or for you 3 will cost, your lives?" Tempunauts Benz said, "We are doing that, yes." trying to ascertain the cause of the violent implosion and eliminate the cause before we return, Tempunaut Crane added, nodding. We have learned already that for reasons unknown, a mass of nearly 100 pounds of miscellaneous Volkswagen motor parts, including cylinders, the head. This is awful, Cassidy thought. This is amazing, he said aloud into his neck mic. The already tragically deceased U.S. Tempunauts, with a determination that could emerge only from the rigorous training and discipline to which they were subjected, and we wondered why at the time, but can clearly see why now, have already analyzed the mechanical slip-up responsible, evidently, for their own deaths, and have begun the laborious process of sifting through and eliminating causes of that slip-up so that they can return to their original launch site and re-enter without mishap. One wonders, Branton mumbled onto the air and into his feedback earphone, what the consequences of this alteration of the near past will be. If in re-entry they do not implode and are not killed, then they will not, well, it's too complex for me, Henry, these time paradoxes that Dr. Feen at the Time Extrusion Labs in Pasadena has so frequently and eloquently brought to our attention. Into all the microphones available, of all sorts, Tempunaut Addison Doug was saying, more quietly now, we must now eliminate the cause of re-entry implosion. The only way out of this trap is for us to die. Death is the only solution for this. For the three of us. He was interrupted as the procession of Cadillacs began to move forward. Shutting off his mic momentarily, Henry Cassidy said to his engineer, Is he nuts? Only time will tell, his engineer said in a hard-to-hear voice. An extraordinary moment in the history of the United States' involvement in time travel, Cassidy said then, into his now live mic. Only time will tell, if you will pardon the inadvertent pun, whether Tempunaut Doug's cryptic remarks, uttered impromptu at this moment of supreme suffering for him, as in a sense to a lesser degree it is for all of us, are the words of a man deranged by grief or an accurate insight into the macabre dilemma that in theoretical terms we knew all along might eventually confront and strike down with its lethal blow, a time travel launch, either ours or the Russians. He segued then to a commercial. You know, Branton's voice muttered in his ear, not on the air but just to the control room and to him. If he's right, they ought to let the poor bastards die. They ought to release them, Cassidy agreed. My God. The way Doug looked and talked, you'd imagine he'd gone through this for 1,000 years and then some. I wouldn't be in his shoes for anything. I'll bet you $50, Branton said. They have gone through this before, many times. Then we have, too, Cassidy said. Rain fell now, making all the lined-up mourners shiny. Their faces, their eyes, even their clothes, everything glistened in wet reflections of broken, fractured light, bent and sparkling as, from gathering gray, formless layers above them, the day darkened. Are we on the air? Branton asked. Who knows? Cassidy thought. He wished the day would end. The Soviet chrononaut, N. Gauki, lifted both hands impassionedly and spoke to the Americans across the table from him in a voice of extreme urgency. It is in the opinion of myself and my colleague Arplenya, who for his pioneering achievements in time travel has been certified a hero of the Soviet people, and rightly so, that based on our own experience and on theoretical material developed both in your own academic circles and in the Soviet Academy of Sciences of the USSR, we believe that Tempunaut A. Doug's fears may be justified, and his deliberate destruction of himself and his teammates at re-entry by hauling a huge mass of auto back with him from ETA, in violation of his orders, should be regarded as the act of a desperate man with no other means of escape. Of course, the decision is up to you. We have only advisory position in this matter. Addison Doug played with a cigarette lighter on the table and did not look up. His ears hummed, and he wondered what that meant. It had an electronic quality. Maybe we're within the module again, he thought. But he did not perceive it. He felt the reality of the people around him, the table, the blue plastic lighter between his fingers. No smoking in the module during re-entry, he thought. He put the light carefully away in his pocket. "We've developed no concrete evidence whatsoever," General Toad said, "that a closed time loop has been set up. There's only the subjective feelings of fatigue on the part of Mr. Doug. Just his belief that he's done all this repeatedly. As he says, it is very probably psychological in nature." He rooted pig-like among the papers before him. "I have a report, not disclosed to the media, from 4 psychiatrists at Yale on his psychological makeup. Although unusually stable, there is a tendency towards cyclothymia on his part, culminating in acute depression. This naturally was taken into account long before the launch, but it was calculated that the joyful qualities of the 2 others in the team would offset this functionally. Anyhow, that depressive tendency in him is exceptionally high now." He held the paper out, but no one at the table accepted it. "Isn't it true, Dr. Fiend," he said, "that an acutely depressed person experiences time in a peculiar way, that is, circular time, time repeating itself, getting nowhere, around and around? The person gets so psychotic that he refuses to let go of the past, reruns it in his head constantly." "But you see," Dr. Fiend said, "this subjective sensation of being trapped is perhaps all we would have." This was the research physicist whose basic work had laid the theoretical foundation for the project. If a closed loop did unfortunately lock into being. "The General," Addison Doug said, "is using words he doesn't understand." "I researched the ones I was unfamiliar with," General Toad said. "The technical psychiatric terms. I know what they mean." To Addison Doug, Ben said, "Where'd you get all those VW parts, Addie?" "I don't have them yet," Addison Doug said. "Probably picked up the first junk he could lay his hands on," Crane said. "Whatever was available. Just before we started back." "We'll start back," Addison Doug corrected. "Here are my instructions to the 3 of you," General Toad said. "You are not in any way to attempt to cause damage or implosion or malfunction during re-entry, either by lugging back extra mass or by any other method that enters your mind. You are to return as scheduled and in replica of the prior simulations. This especially applies to you, Mr. Doug." The phone by his right arm buzzed. He frowned, picked up the receiver. An interval passed, and then he scowled deeply and set the receiver back down, loudly. "You've been overruled," Dr. Fiend said. "Yes, I have," General Toad said. "And I must say at this time that I am personally glad because my decision was an unpleasant one." "Then we can arrange for implosion at re-entry," Ben said after a pause. "The 3 of you are to make the decision," General Toad said. "Since it involves your lives, it's been entirely left up to you, whichever way you want it. If you're convinced you're in a closed time loop, and you believe a massive implosion at re-entry will abolish it." He ceased talking, as Tempunauts Doug rose to his feet. Are you going to make another speech, Doug?" he said. "I just want to thank everyone involved," Addison Doug said, "for letting us decide." He gazed haggard-faced and wearily around at all the individuals seated at the table. "I really appreciate it." "You know," Ben said slowly, "blowing us up at re-entry could add nothing to the chances of abolishing a closed loop. In fact, that could do it, Doug." "Not if it kills us all," Crane said. "You agree with Hattie?" Ben said. "Dead is dead," Crane said. "I've been pondering it. What other way is more likely to get us out of this than if we're dead? What possible other way? You may be in no loop, Dr. Fiend pointed out. But we may be, Crane said. Doug, still on his feet, said to Crane and Benz, could we include Mary Lou in our decision-making? Why? Ben said. I can't think too clearly anymore, Doug said. Mary Lou can help me. I depend on her. Sure, Crane said. Benz, too, nodded. General Toad examined his wristwatch stoically and said, Gentlemen, this concludes our discussion. Soviet chrononaut Gauki removed his headphones and neck mic and hurried toward the 3 U.S. Tempunauts, his hand extended. He was apparently saying something in Russian, but none of them could understand it. They moved away somberly, clustering close. In my opinion, you're nuts, Addy, Ben said. But it would appear that I'm the minority now. If he is right, Crane said. If, 1 chance in a billion, if we are going back again and again forever, that would justify it. Could we go see Mary Lou? Addis and Doug said. Drive over to her place now. She's waiting outside, Crane said. Striding up to stand beside the 3 Tempunauts, General Toad said, You know, what made the determination to go the way it did was the public reaction to how you, Doug, looked and behaved during the funeral procession. The NCS advisors came to the conclusion that the public would, like you, rather be certain it's over for all of you. That it's more of a relief to them to know you're free of your mission than to save the project and obtain a perfect re-entry. I guess you really made a lasting impression on them, Doug. That whining you did. He walked away then, leaving the 3 of them standing there alone. Forget him, Crane said to Addis and Doug. Forget everyone like him. We've got to do what we have to do. Mary Lou will explain it to me, Doug said. She would know what to do, what would be right. I'll go get her, Crane said, and after that the 4 of us can drive somewhere, maybe to her place, and decide what to do. Okay? Thank you, Addis and Doug said, nodding. He glanced around for her hopefully, wondering where she was. In the next room, perhaps, somewhere close. I appreciate that, he said. Benz and Crane eyed each other. He saw that, but did not know what it meant. He knew only that he needed someone, Mary Lou most of all, to help him understand what the situation was, and what to finalize on to get them out of it. Mary Lou drove them north from Los Angeles in the super-fast lane of the freeway toward Ventura, and after that inland to Ojai. The 4 of them said very little. Mary Lou drove well, as always. Leaning against her, Addison Doug felt himself relax into a temporary sort of peace. There's nothing like having a chick drive you, Crane said, after many miles had passed in silence. It's an aristocratic sensation, Benz murmured, to have a woman do the driving, like your nobility being chauffeured. Mary Lou said, until she runs into something, some big, slow object. Addison Doug said, when you saw me trudging up to your place, up the redwood round path the other day, what did you think? Tell me honestly. You looked, the girl said, as if you'd done it many times. You looked worn and tired and ready to die. At the end, she hesitated. I'm sorry, but that's how you looked, Daddy. I thought to myself, he knows the way too well. Like I'd done it too many times. Yes, she said. Then you vote for implosion, Addison Doug said. Well, be honest with me, he said. Mary Lou said, look in the back seat, the box on the floor. With a flashlight from the glove compartment, the 3 men examined the box. Addison Doug, with fear, saw its contents. VW motor parts, rusty and worn, still oily. I got them from behind a foreign car garage near my place, Mary Lou said. on the way to Pasadena. The first drunk I saw that seemed as if it'd be heavy enough. I had heard them say on TV at launch time that anything over 50 pounds up to... It'll do it, Addison Doug said. It did do it. So there's no point in going to your place, Crane said. It's decided. We might as well head south toward the module and initiate the procedure for getting out of ETA and back to re-entry. His voice was heavy but evenly pitched. Thanks for your vote, Miss Hawkins. She said, You were all so tired. I'm not, Ben said. I'm mad. Mad as hell. At me? Addison Doug said. I don't know. Ben said. It just... Hell. He lapsed into brooding silence then, hunched over, baffled and inert, withdrawn as far as possible from the others in the car. At the next freeway junction, she turned the car south. A sense of freedom seemed now to fill her, and Addison Doug felt some of the weight, the fatigue, ebbing already. On the wrist of each of the three men, the emergency alert receiver buzzed its warning tone. They all started. What's that mean? Mary Lou said, slowing the car. We're to contact General Toad by phone as soon as possible, Crane said. He pointed. There's a standard station over there. Take the next exit, Miss Hawkins. We can phone him from there. A few minutes later, Mary Lou brought the car to a halt beside the outdoor phone booth. I hope it's not bad news, she said. I'll talk first, Doug said, getting out. Bad news, he thought with labored amusement. Like what? He crunched stiffly across to the phone booth, entered, shut the door behind him, dropped in a dime, and dialed the toll-free number. Well, do I have news? General Toad said when the operator had put him on the line. It's a good thing we got a hold of you. Just a minute. I'm going to let Dr. Fiend tell you this himself. You're more apt to believe him than me. Several clicks, and then Dr. Fiend's reedy, precise, scholarly voice, but intensified by urgency. What's the bad news? Addison Doug said. Not bad, necessarily, Dr. Fiend said. I've had computations run since our discussion, and it would appear, by that I mean it is statistically probable, but still unverified for a certainty, that you are right, Addison. You are in a closed time loop. Addison Doug exhaled raggedly. You nowhere autocratic mother, he thought. You probably knew all along. However, Dr. Fiend said excitedly, stammering a little, I also calculate, we jointly do, largely through Caltech, that the greatest likelihood of maintaining the loop is to implode on re-entry. Do you understand, Addison? If you lug all those rusty VW parts back and implode, then your statistical chances of closing the loop forever is greater than if you simply re-enter and all goes well. Addison Doug said nothing. In fact, Eddie, and this is the severe part that I have to stress, implosion at re-entry, especially a massive, calculated one of the sort we seem to see shaping up. Do you grasp all this, Addie? Am I getting through to you? For Christ's sake, Addie. Virtually guarantees the locking in of an absolutely unyielding loop such as you've got in mind, such as we've all been worried about from the start. A pause. Addie, are you there? Addison Doug said, I want to die. That's your exhaustion from the loop. God knows how many repetitions there have already been for the three of you. No, he said, and started to hang up. Let me speak with Benson Crane, Dr. Fiend said rapidly. Please, before you go ahead with re-entry. Especially Ben's. I'd like to speak with him in particular. Please, Addison, for their sake. Your almost total exhaustion has... He hung up, left the phone booth, step by step. As he climbed back into the car, he heard their two alert receivers still buzzing. General Toad said the automatic call for us would keep your two receivers doing that for a while, he said, and shut the car door after him. Let's take off." "Doesn't he want to talk to us?" Ben said. Addison Doug said, "General Toad wanted to inform us that they have a little something for us. We've been voted a special congressional citation for valor, or some damn thing like that. A special medal they never voted anyone before, to be awarded posthumously." "Well, hell, that's about the only way it can be awarded," Crane said. Mary Lou, as she started up the engine, began to cry. "It'll be a relief," Crane said presently, as they returned bumpily to the freeway, "when it's over." "It won't be long now," Addison Doug's mind declared. On their wrists, the emergency alert receivers continued to put out their combined buzzing. "They will nibble you to death," Addison Doug said. The endless wearing down by various bureaucratic voices. The others in the car turned to gaze at him inquiringly, with uneasiness mixed with perplexity. "Yeah," Crane said, "these automatic alerts are really a nuisance." He sounded tired. As tired as I am, Addison Doug thought. And, realizing this, he felt better. It showed how right he was. Great drops of water struck the windshield. It had now begun to rain. That pleased him, too. It reminded him of that most exalted of all experiences within the shortness of his life. The funeral procession moving slowly down Pennsylvania Avenue, the flag-draped caskets. Closing his eyes, he leaned back and felt good at last, and heard, all around him once again, the sorrow-bent people, and, in his head, dreamed of the special congressional medal. For weariness, he thought. A medal for being tired. He saw, in his head, himself in other parades too, and in the deaths of many. But really it was one death, and one parade. Slow cars moving along the street in Dallas, and with Dr. King as well. He saw himself return again and again, in his closed cycle of life, to the national mourning that he could not, and they could not forget. He would be there. They would always be there. It would always be, and every one of them would return together, again and again, forever. To the place, the moment they wanted to be, the event which meant the most to all of them. This was his gift to them, the people, his country. He had bestowed upon the world a wonderful burden, the dreadful and weary miracle of eternal life.